Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate the opportunity and the interest that you have in talking about asset recovery and what that means in the new world of crypto and digital assets. As you heard from the introduction, we have some really great guests here to speak with you about this topic today, and we're going to keep this fairly conversational. I think before we get started, it might help us to make sure we're tailoring our comments to just do an informal poll about where you all are coming from. So maybe those who work for the government or in public sector, just kind of raise their hands, just get a sense. Okay, very good. The others, private sector finance, compliance type, all right. Within that, how many in here would consider themselves investigators who are actually doing that type of investigation work? Okay, excellent. All right, and lastly, how many of you have experience in asset recovery? Okay, awesome. Well, you're not going to be able to say that after this session because that's really what we're going to talk about. When it comes to asset recovery, if we don't focus on finding those illicit assets and returning them back to the victims, then these criminals have the funds to just spool and do it again. We used to say in my time in the FBI, if you really want to make an impact, you've got to follow, find, and seize the money. Otherwise, they'll just sprout up again like weeds and start all over, and we fail to bring full justice to the victims. So today's conversation is going to be focusing on this principle of asset recovery and how that can be accomplished in the digital asset world. So first, why don't we begin? Aidan, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the stage today.
Look, it's wonderful to be here. Asset Reality was set up to try and be almost crypto asset recovery in a box. I'm an ex-criminal investigator myself and the rest of the company. We try and sort of plug those gaps where we have fantastic technology, but quite often, whether it's digital companies don't know how to actually deal with victims of hacks, government agencies want to investigate and seize crypto, but how do you actually seize it? How do you actually realize it? So we try and be that sort of outsourced agent that when someone is interacting with digital assets, that we can worry and do the heavy lifting for them. And we came through the Techstars process, which Chainalysis came through 6 years ago, so sort of no pressure. Sort of within 6 more years, there will be any $8 billion companies. But but like I say, we sort of tie in where you guys sort of start the case off with the investigation piece. We sort of fit in literally in the middle to try and do the practical stuff. We're not the experts, but we try and do the practical side of things.
Thank you. Amanda?
So then we do the next part of it. My name's Amanda Tuminelli. I'm a lawyer at Kobre and Kim, and I do crypto asset recovery work and also some criminal defense work in the cryptocurrency space. Our firm is global in reach, and we do a lot of cross-border litigation. So after people like Aidan and other people in this room have tracked down assets and traced them and identified where the bad actors are, we will actually bring a lawsuit or use some other kind of enforcement mechanism to actually recover the assets in a legal way.
So that leads us, Aidan, what really is asset recovery and how is it the same or different with regard to digital assets?
I think there's a huge sort of misconception about, in asset recovery as it stands, sort of pre-digital assets, asset recovery doesn't work. It's accepted. There's various reports around the world that around 2% of assets are actually seized from criminals globally. This is from a Europol report, and it was backed up in the US. So asset recovery in general, the actual recovery bit, what you get back in a fraud case and criminal, organized criminal gangs, the recovery wasn't great statistically, and that was for lots of different reasons, like the legislation. We all have examples of a car being seized and it takes 5 years to sell the car, or a yacht being seized and the cost of storing the yacht sort of outstripped the returns. Then crypto comes along and you think, how on earth are we going to deal with this asset now in an already sort of weakened system? But crypto is the opposite. If you have a crypto case, you should breathe a sigh of relief. It is asset recovery 2.0. I don't have to get on a plane to Fiji to seize crypto assets, but I do if it's an oligarch's yacht. The economies of scale at which you can seize digital assets is astonishing. I know there's a lot of people here from IRSCI, for example. IRSCI have seized more digital assets than the entire United States law enforcement efforts in non-crypto assets. And that's been repeated all around the world. Law enforcement agencies in the UK, for example, have seized more in Bitcoin than in all other asset categories combined across all other forces. So I think it's a really positive thing if we can sort of align all of the stars. Crypto asset recovery is easier than regular asset recovery. And yes, I said that on record.
We're going to hold you to that, and I happen to agree. I also neglected to ask, how many of you, I'm not sure if you want to raise your hand and admit it, but how many of you are attorneys, solicitors? Okay, great, so that's good. So Amanda, tell us a little bit about your world with regard to asset recovery.
Yeah, asset recovery litigation is in the crypto space is not that different than asset recovery litigation outside of the crypto space, just to add on to what Aidan was saying. So it's still the same idea, right? We're going to file a civil suit, or we're going to use some kind of enforcement or judgment mechanism to recover assets in a legal process. So the reason why crypto makes things a little bit more interesting or more difficult is usually it's crossing a border, right? So there's multiple jurisdictions involved. Maybe the person or group of people who hold the crypto now are not reachable because they're offshore somewhere, and you need to partner with a government agency in an offshore jurisdiction to recover that. So it just makes it more interesting in that it's a dynamic and evolving space, but it's still the same kind of litigation that you would do for any other kind of asset.
So we oftentimes talk about war stories, and case examples are some of the best ways to learn a new technique. So walk us through, Aidan, and then we'll turn to Amanda. What are some of those case examples you could share with the group that illustrates the approach of asset recovery with crypto?
So I think it is demonstrating the art of the possible, and sometimes there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in crypto cases. And sort of the average type of case we're seeing where we're talking about NFTs, and there's been some sort of incredible previous speakers, particularly the state and local presentation, reminding us that this is just an asset category, but it has lots of extra potential because of the traceability of the asset. So the type of cases we see are your usual, where you've got a large digital company that has a victim of a fraud or a hack, and that's kind of where the case starts. It's, I've lost my assets, how can you try and unpick this for us? And again, the ability the crypto asset recovery is measured in minutes and hours, whereas traditional asset recovery, getting information out of an overseas jurisdiction, is months, sometimes years. So for us, it's about getting that first breadcrumb, and that first breadcrumb is usually that bit of intelligence, that disclosure, that victim report, taking that through, using the tools. And again, I can't stress enough, if you're not in crypto investigations, I mean, a normal investigation is sending out requests to overseas entities. The pace is so slow, where we saw it was your LinkedIn post, the Twitter hack, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about it within minutes and hours, and it's gone here, it's moved here, it's over here, and here's where you want to seize the asset. So really, we just take that initial breadcrumb, and then we try and identify the asset, and then bring in the experts to say, can you actually freeze that asset? And then once we get our hands on it, put it with one of the many insured, regulated custodians around the world, and then eventually go through the court process and get the asset sold. But as Amanda said, it's the same process. There's no special crypto process. It's just an asset category that goes through the normal commercial litigation or criminal investigation process.
So raising your level of crypto literacy and understanding how those assets are treated and moved is really one of those first steps. Any case immediately come to mind? And then I'm going to pivot to Amanda to ask her the same question.
Well, again, it was like the example that was made previously. It was understanding that these are not crypto cases. They are aggravated assault that has crypto. It is no kidnapping, it has crypto. It's ransomware or romance scams. And the Teresco case is one of the most famous cases in the UK, where someone who was involved with organised crime gangs and had a lot of assets and a very colourful background, someone tried to tag or kidnap him to steal his crypto. His girlfriend then reported him missing. And then it turns out that, well, why were they after you? And then they didn't realize he had crypto. So then when they actually brought him in, he was like, no one actually arrested, no one tried to kidnap me, because he's covered in cuts and bruises. And they dug a bit deeper and found out that basically he was involved in a huge laundering operation, and there was crypto there. So it wasn't a crypto case. We're finding them in just average cases now, where it's just an asset class, like finding a Rolex or a Bentley or a yacht.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting, and that story we get repeated when we talk to customers or clients around the world, where crypto doesn't have to be 100% of the case, it just needs to be a part, right? Amanda?
Yeah, so to give an example of crypto being a minute-by-minute or hour-by-hour kind of situation, we had a Swiss GmbH come to us, and in that situation, the bad actors were the CEO and COO of the company, who happened to be a couple, and they were trying to negotiate an exit package from the company, and decided that they were going to hold all of the company's operating funds hostage, which happened to be $50 to $60 million at the time in Ether, and also the company's tokens. So they make off with the crypto, and in this case, we were lucky because we knew exactly where they were. They were in New York. We have Reactor in-house. We traced the funds to a cold storage wallet, and we could see, that's where they were sitting, and we knew where they were. So we filed a civil suit in federal district court in the Southern District of New York here in Manhattan. And we put the pressure on, and we were very aggressive. So we filed a TRO, a temporary restraining order, and a preliminary injunction, and pursued a very aggressive briefing schedule. So we were in front of a judge within 48 hours. And through the TRO, we got a court order that forced the CEO and COO to transfer the funds to an escrow agent who would hold them and then allow the company to operate, and also to transfer the cold storage wallet to an escrow agent, which was a piece of paper. But the escrow agent held on to that for the pendency of the suit. And we didn't stop there, right? So after you get a TRO, that's temporary. You really want the preliminary injunction or the permanent injunction to make sure that it's not going to get undone and you're going to have to start from the beginning. So we continue to be very aggressive in explaining to the judge this needs to happen very quickly, and we basically forced these two individuals to settle and succeeded in getting the funds back, and the company could operate. So I think the takeaway from a case example like that is you have to really think about what the outcome is that you want. In some litigation, you want to drag it out, right? Sometimes you do want it to be a media frenzy and you want to be able to talk about it for months, and in other cases, you need the funds back right away. And in this case, that's what we did. We needed them back within like days, right? So we were able to pursue a really aggressive strategy to do that.
Amanda, that's fascinating. Tell us a little bit of the impact that timing has on these kinds of investigations and what's possible.
Yeah, so I mean, being able to use Reactor or another kind of forensic software, tracing software, is really important because you have to move quickly. So like in this case, there was a fear that these bad actors were going to dissipate the funds, right? Once they're in their possession, the company had no control over them. So it was very important to be able to get in there and see where they were, and then get a court order really quickly to make sure they didn't go anywhere else.
It's actually on that point. It's also worth pointing out that the crypto asset recovery journey is often likened to a tightrope. You know exactly where it starts, you know exactly where it ends, but it can be very unforgiving. And I think to add sort of color to what Amanda was saying as well, that your point about crypto literacy, we've seen so many cases where all of the good work has been done and you've got that freezing order, or you've identified using the tools where the assets are. And then someone's like, we've got it, we've got the private key, we've got the seed word, we've gone, and then we've drove back to the office and we've started the process to recover the assets. And by the time they log in, the assets are gone. And it's your issue about timing and crypto literacy, that knowing that there could be thousands of copies of that key. Sometimes we've seen, there's been, I'll not name agencies, but there's been cases where someone has seized assets and sort of celebrated, they've got the seed word and the recovery seed on a piece of paper in a clear polythene pouch that goes back to the property store. And then as they then go to move the asset later on, the asset's not there. There was a case as well that someone proudly held their severed head when they got the criminal arrested, and some clever kid sort of screen grabbed the YouTube page and actually was able to reconstruct and to pinch some of the assets. So I think there's so many little things that could also sting you that doesn't happen in the traditional asset recovery world, which moves quite, like the yacht is going to incur a lot of costs, but bar Houdini, it should still be there wherever you've left it, whereas there's been lots of crypto cases where people have been like, we thought we had this, but now we have this, or that was meant to be there and it's not there anymore. And from an insolvency practitioner point of view, from a civil recovery point of view, it's also your worst nightmare, because if you get it wrong, everyone can unpick your work. So if you miss an asset that you should have found, that you could have, and again, this is the key to using the tools. If you miss something and I'm a creditor and you didn't get my asset back, I'll appoint somebody else to go over your work, and the whole world will pick apart your work. And we see this with ethical hackers saying, oh, we can see the funds, it's gone here, you should look over here. So it's almost an open season on everyone's work because of the nature of blockchain. So if you get it wrong, you'll be, the world will tell you very quickly.
That's fascinating. As we think about, let's pivot now to talk about public-private partnerships. A number of you, in fact, in every one of the examples you shared, you talked about, well, we had to coordinate with these individuals and they had to coordinate with these individuals. Let's talk a little bit about that and maybe get some of your thoughts. Let's go to you, Amanda. What are some of your thoughts about effective public-private partnerships and how they can have an impact on these kinds of cases?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that for both the individual who's the victim of a hack or a ransomware scheme and also for the government agency involved, it can be beneficial to everyone. So for an individual, we were actually just talking about this, for an individual who is maybe the victim of losing under $10,000, that person may not be able to fund an asset recovery campaign that involves multiple jurisdictions. But if you have 10,000 people who lost $10,000, then you might be able to fund a really aggressive and strategic asset recovery campaign. So that's the private part of it, but the reason why you can then benefit a government agency is government agencies have to substantiate their claims, right? So if they have a group of victims come to them and provide them with evidence, that helps them with their case. And it's to the benefit of the individual because governments have MLAT power, right? They can get discovery from other jurisdictions. So you can sort of like tag on to a government investigation or criminal case if that's what you, if you're the victim of a hack or a ransomware scheme. And you could get some free discovery and have that benefit going both ways. So I think it's really important. And I can give you just one short example. We had an insurance company come to us and a number of their clients had been the victims of a ransomware attack. The insurance company had already reimbursed their clients, but they wanted to go after the potential bad actor. The bad actor was in Canada and being pursued by the Canadian government. So we approached the DOJ. The DOJ already knew about it, had been working with the Canadian authorities, and through the MLAT process, they were able to get a mountain of discovery that quickly established our client and their clients as victims. So they'll be in line if and when the criminal defendant is convicted, they'll be in line to receive money from the restitution as a result of that case.
That's very important, right? And part of your advocacy responsibility for that victim.
Yeah, exactly.
Aidan?
Yeah, I think that by a show of hands, do another straw poll, who here has someone who has approached them as a victim, particularly you're in this industry, how many people have had someone come to them and say, I've been a victim of a hack, or I've got a friend who's been a victim of a hack, can you help them? Has anyone been in that position? And I can absolutely guarantee, and please prove me wrong if anyone has an example, like the user journey for someone who's been hacked or has lost funds is horrific. Like there is simply, we're so spoiled in the sort of TradFi space that if we look at our bank statement and someone has bought a laptop in Iceland while I'm sitting here today, I call the bank, they make it whole. I have no idea what goes on in the background, but my account is recredited again. And I think that the big barrier to mainstream adoption and the thing that public and private sector sort of partnerships is solving is to try and start to apply those standards in crypto. And if you have a loss situation and you contact one of these billion-dollar companies who have just grown, it's not necessarily their fault, they've just grown so fast. The basic things, customer service. Michael mentioned this morning about mainstream user protections. This is the stuff that gets the senators excited for the wrong reasons, in that you can't operate in this sort of sector with all of this value swimming around and not have the basics sort of covered off. That if someone loses, and Amanda pointed out, fraudsters know this. They do not go after people for $10 million. They go after 10,000 people for 10,000 because they know that if you contact the police or if you go to a lawyer and say, I've lost this amount of money, the barrier, because it'll cost you $50,000 or $60,000 to go and get that first discovery, get those sort of first freezing orders. So we're hoping to see now, we're doing a lot of work with governments to say, well, if you don't have the resources, some countries simply just aren't there yet. FATF have identified nearly 50 countries in the world that have zero crypto infrastructure in terms of enforcement and investigation capability. So we try and work with governments, like literally pro bono, to say, if an individual resident comes to you with a crypto case, and this is the wonderful decentralized bit, we can investigate a case in the Seychelles. It doesn't matter, it's on the blockchain. So if someone says, I've lost money because I fell for this scam, we can then use the tools, look at it, and your new product this morning is a great example of that. Being able to see the address that the scammer got you to pay into, then able to sort of explode that address backwards and say, there's 25 people here. there's actually 50 more victims, all of a sudden you'll get the interest of law enforcement. So sometimes it takes the private sector to sit in between and almost lobby and try and get these cases across the line, because the existing infrastructure in the UK and the US is sort of, it gets reported, but sometimes nothing really happens. And that's just simply because there's not enough resources to go around. So I think public and private sector is the only way that this will be solved. And I think it goes back to that collaborative sort of nature. Everyone's talking about protocols, building on top of protocols, everyone working together. Again, I'm a huge advocate that I think that crypto asset recovery can become the benchmark that regular asset recovery aspires to. And public and private sector partnership is alive and well. Governments don't make their own blockchain analytic tools. In the same way they don't try and make their own sort of video calling, they use Zoom. So I think we just need to keep sort of keep pressing that best practice.
So as we see this market emerge, Amanda, tell us a little bit about how law firms are moving into the space to assist with asset recovery, maybe some examples from your firm.
Sure. So I think that you'll see now at every firm there's at least one person who does cryptocurrency, right? But we have Reactor in-house. I think we're probably one of the first firms that decided to bring the software in-house. And that allows us to triage really quickly. So if somebody is coming to us and saying, I'm the victim of a hack, we can get on Reactor and quickly determine, like, okay, we can see where it went, or we can't see where it went, we need to enlist the help of an expert. So it allows us to triage, but that doesn't mean that we don't partner with third-party experts. We still have to do that because we cannot be our own witnesses at trial. So we still need to use investigators who could potentially actually take the witness stand and talk about the analysis that they did. But it allows us to get a really good picture of what's going on. We use it offensively and defensively. So offensively, if there's a victim of a hack who comes in and says, okay, I want to track this down, we'll look at it, we'll decide how we can make this asset recovery campaign work. We also use it defensively. So if a person comes to us accused of some kind of wrongdoing related to the blockchain or crypto, we get a picture of what law enforcement's seeing or what a plaintiff is seeing and what they're going to bring claims about. So we really use it on both sides of the V.
Aidan, tell us a little bit about what Asset Realty is doing and where this is going.
And forgive me, the US audience, Asset Reality. I shouldn't have called the company Asset Reality because when you come to the US, it was like Realty. Everyone calls Realty.
So sell me a house.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll maybe seize your house, we'll not sell it. Yeah. Again, from our point, it's sort of building on that previous example of trying to sort of bridge the knowledge and resources gap. So one of the things that we're sort of working on at the minute is assisting countries, for example, developing countries or any of those specific ones that are set up as I don't want to name countries, but a lot of the countries that we all know that have lots of exchanges set up there, but they maybe don't have the sort of regulatory capability right now. And I love this sort of like democratization of sort of crypto asset recovery. So we'll partner with those government agencies to say, well, look, if you've got people giving you disclosures from the exchanges, just because you don't have a regulator in place yet doesn't mean you can't still build out the best practice. So we'll physically take those disclosures from the exchanges and act as their subcontractor and then look through it and say, well, actually, the Germans have put in an MLAT to this exchange. The exchange has told the local regulator. The local regulator still hasn't actually been given powers to do anything yet, so they just have an in-tray of all of these cases. So we'll use the analytic tools to be able to say, well, actually, let's screen through these and see, is there a civil forfeiture in there for them? Because again, it's all on the blockchain, it's all publicly available information. So you're able to have this level of collaboration that you wouldn't traditionally have in any other sort of, you can imagine the intelligence world sort of having an absolute panic attack if you said, we're just going to bring in a private company and give them all of our intel. But why not? Like the problem with suspicious activity reports around the world is the financial sector, there's too many of them. So we're hoping to get the private sector involved in that sort of that dilemma. So we're doing it in crypto to say, well, if we can help a government, get more assets seized, that puts more money back into society, more money back into the community, funds law enforcement, allows them to get trained and buy the tools. You sort of have to start rolling the boulder for them to let them see this sort of virtuous cycle. But I think that's the big challenge, where you have governments trying to balance the economic opportunities of being a crypto-friendly company or country against the FATFs and the regulators of the world saying, if you don't have the controls in place, we're going to put you on the grey list. So I think public and private sector partnerships sort of can solve that sort of problem for them.
We heard this morning about the growth of digital assets and this blockchain industry. And we had a number of examples mentioned of what the future could look like, where digital assets take on a whole new realm. Obviously, we've seen the emergence of NFTs over the last year, right? And what the future of that, people's mortgages, your driver's license, your personal identity documents, and all of that stored on the blockchain with personal data ownership. And so if we think the volume of business now is heavy with digital assets in the form of cryptocurrencies and NFTs, what does that look like 5 and 10 years from now when other value items move onto the blockchain and we're having to manage and regulate those? So let's talk a little bit about, we have a number of people here in the room, a few who've been involved in asset recovery, but most are seeking to learn about it. Aidan, why don't you lead us and tell us, how can people get started in this to build out an asset recovery program in their organization and raise that crypto literacy?
I think the biggest thing is to, I mean, you have to almost win the political battle and the hearts and minds battle. If we can articulate the story of just how successful this could be in terms of, like, money talks in any organization. Again, I used the IRS example earlier on, and we're seeing like multi-million, billion-dollar crypto seizures. Like, who doesn't want to be a part of that as an enforcement agency, taking money, out of sort of criminal enterprises, generating more money that will fund sort of more activity. So I think the only way people are going to get involved is by getting involved and sort of jumping in with 2 feet. But again, I keep stressing the point, in a personal capacity, I'm a United Nations consultant on seized assets, and I keep telling people, this is the easiest category to test and to dabble in and start running pilots and little projects and getting a friendly exchange that makes disclosures, and all of the tooling already exists. So you don't actually, and if you can't do it yourself, then outsource it. I mean, there's always those options, and there's so much, I think, again, we see this in the whole blockchain industry where there is that collaboration. There is lots of sort of projects and training available that if an agency, private or public sector, says we want to get involved in this, even as data and R&D, companies will work with each other and say, well, look, we can help you do this. We can implement a program. And we see examples now where government agencies and law enforcement in particular, and the state and locals are starting to, well, let's maybe use the reactor tool and let's have a look at this, or let's see if we can go and get some assets seized by putting some pressure on an exchange to disclose information of illicit behavior. And all of a sudden, they're seizing more assets than ever before. So I think it is about having that open mindset to realize that there's so much value out there. And if you go to your chief, you go to your station head and say, actually, we've done one seizure, and we've got more in one day than we've got in a year's worth of activity, that will just kick things off. But too many are still staying on the sidelines. I'm sick of the term that, no, we don't do crypto. You're going, like, that's like saying we don't do electricity or like the internet. It's beyond a sector now. I think it gets dumbed down too much that people think it's a niche, whereas we see it as a proactive. Someone gets stopped in search at the side of the road, they have a Rolex and they'll have an NFT, like you said. That'll just be the future of things. They will have a digital asset, like a blue tick on Twitter. They will have this digital ownership, and then we'll see it also coming up in the massive cases, in the fraud cases, the Ponzi schemes, but it will just be sort of bouncing around as an asset category as well. So I think it's just a case of just getting involved.
And I think just to add to that, we were talking about this in the hallway, I think that and a lot of people in this room know this, there's a myth that, like, if it's in crypto or an NFT, it's gone. Like, if somebody takes it, it's just gone and you can't do anything about it. And I think the rollout of Storyline today shows it's really not gone. Like, even if it goes through a mixer, it's just gonna take longer to figure it out. You can still hire an expert to trace it and figure out where it went. I know you can obviously chain hop and do other things to try to make it really difficult, but I think as a litigator or as a person who's trying to start a case, I would not fall into the trap of thinking like, oh, well, the person absconded and it's gone forever. I don't think that really exists anymore.
And it's important to point out, we're talking about asset recovery. Like, let's not underestimate the value of the sort of evidential sort of side of things. If someone uses a mixer and the funds are gone and you can't find them, or they are in a jurisdiction that's hard to recover, well, I've got evidence that you tried to sort of obfuscate. I've got evidence that you tried to dissipate the asset. You've just made it really easy for me to go and get a freezing order and seize all your actual assets. So we see those cases where the crypto is gone. In the same way, the burglar runs off with the diamond's gone. You can still arrest them. You can still seize their house. You can still go after any other assets. So I still think that it's not a zero-sum thing. It may assist you evidentially. It may assist you in building up an overall package. It may, as we saw in Storyline, it may connect the dots with other individuals that you didn't even know were sort of part of your investigation. So I think when people start to see the art of the possible, and it almost reminds me back in sort of my old law enforcement days, I remember going to presentations where financial investigators had to stand up at the front of the room and plead with like regular detectives to use the financial investigators, and showing people that, you know, if you look on a bank statement, you can find all this other stuff. And they're like, it's a homicide, get out of my way. You're like, no, but you can use like ATM withdrawals to put the criminal at the scene. And like we used to have to convince people to use financial intelligence in other cases. I think we'll be sitting here in 5 years' time talking about the fact that it's just another part of your investigation strategy. Is there a digital asset footprint? Can I use it evidentially? Will it lead to an asset seizure, or will it just tell the story? I think it'll just become part of the general ecosystem.
I think so. You know, when we used to say in the Bureau, if you follow the money, you find the people responsible. We all in this room call lots of people. We maybe text lots of people, but you only send and receive money from people that matter, right? And those, you follow the money, you literally find those are responsible. Well, we've set aside some time at the end of this discussion to be able to take audience questions. And so I want to open the floor up to maybe some questions that have come up in your mind as you've heard these two experts talk about asset recovery. Let's see. I think we've got a question back there. And for the microphone, let's say it loud and proud so we can pick it up.
Thanks for speaking with us today. This is great. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the actual practical seizures themselves. Do you have specific asset providers or wallet providers that you guys have worked with in the past that are kind of more or less likely to respond to seizure requests, to actually be able to seize the asset in particular? I know some stable coins, USDT and others, maybe can freeze it here and then issue it a replacement. Could you talk a little bit more about the actual practical on-chain seizures?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
So again, it's really important to remember that all of the problems and challenges you've just listed are exactly the same with regular assets. So in the sense of if I know that, I don't want to name a diamond company, but you can guess who I'm going to mention. If you imagine that I have a criminal that has a safety deposit box or has some very expensive assets or art with a certain company under storage, like that company will fight me in terms of recognizing my order and saying it's not their assets and it's held by an offshore company. So you find all of these problems that you've mentioned. So if you imagine to walk through it, it's kind of just like seizing a bank account. So there's two things you mentioned. There's the interaction with exchanges to get information out of them, and then there's the actual act of seizing. So the point you've alluded to, which is commonly known in the industry, is that it used to be that you would carry out an investigation, you use Reactor, you can see that someone has stolen all my assets and they've put it through a well-known exchange. Now, it used to be that it was quite difficult to get information out of the exchanges. I think that's a bit of an urban myth, and it's probably unfair on the exchanges now, because the vast majority of the reputable exchanges have like some of the greatest crypto investigators in the world working in them, ex-law enforcement. The majority of them have law enforcement liaison teams. So actually getting the information is quite easy in many cases, but like all industries, there will be bad actors. In the same way, there will be the art gallery that doesn't do KYC or give out or that does AML checks when people buy high-value assets. So you see the same in both sectors. In terms of the seizure process, if we can trace those assets to the exchange, then we're bringing in the likes of Amanda and we're getting a freezing order, or we're bringing in law enforcement to get the assets frozen. And if it's a reputable exchange, they'll just hold it on the account for you. And then you can say, I've now got my order, I want to move it. So if it's a government agency, they may already have a procured agent who stores their assets. In just the same way, they've got someone that stores the boats, the cars, the Rolexes. In different jurisdictions, some will actually manage the asset themselves. So the government agency will find it at an exchange, they'll set up their own wallet, and they'll say, sweep it out of that wallet and send it to a wallet that we control. Again, just like finding money in a bank account offshore and saying, send the asset back to us. I think that will also change as well, because just basic risk and liability, you don't bring the yacht back to the police station, you wouldn't keep a gold bar in your drawer. I think many agencies had to be innovative back in the day when they were first seizing assets, because there was no other way to seize crypto. So they had to create their own wallet, take it off the criminal, take it out of the dodgy exchange and move it to a wallet they controlled. But we're seeing now that the appetite, if you're a risk partner in the big four firm or a risk partner in a law firm and someone says, I'm going to set up my own wallet and I'm going to control the keys to 10 million in crypto, they're like, no, you're not. Go and get a subcontractor to do that. In the same way, you wouldn't hang the Picasso in your office because you've just got a freezing order on it. So I think the industry is changing so quickly. One of the previous panels mentioned that if it happened 2 years ago, it's out of date. Like, there's no point even using it if it happened or if that was the guidance 2 years ago. And that's a really positive thing in crypto asset recovery because you've got so many compliant exchanges. You've got so many insured digital custodians. You've got some of the biggest banks in the world now offering crypto storage. So if you're a government agency or you're in asset recovery and in litigation, there's actually tons of options for you to go and trace the NFT, get the NFT put in an account that you control but is insured with a reputable third party that's regulated, for example. So I think the whole ecosystem is now maturing. The points you're making are very valid in the sense of there has been lots of challenges in the past, but we're seeing more of the challenges now and more of the altcoins or the platforms that aren't compliant or the bad actors. And what's happening now is there's a nice sort of oil and water thing happening that you see the name and you know we're in for trouble. Or you see the name and you think, thank God it's there. I know those guys will put an administrative freeze on. They'll let me go and get my court order. And that's what happened in the traditional financial world. If you had a bank account with $1 million in it and you had a murder suspect or you had a criminal suspect, if you rang the bank and said, I'm trying to get a freezing order, I've got Amanda on the case right now, no bank manager in the world would let that money go out the door because they know that they could potentially get done for AML offences as well. And the exchanges are following suit now. They're being really helpful in many cases, but there will always be sort of bad actors.
Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Can you talk a bit about the implications of exchanges kind of taking it upon themselves to return money to victims? Where it's like you see a scam happen, and it's like, yeah, this is a clear scam. I'm not going to call law enforcement. I'm just going to send the money back to the victim. Yeah. What kind of legal implications are there?
For me, this is my nirvana with asset.
Maybe just for the camera,
yeah, I'll
repeat the question back.
So the question is about exchanges and digital companies being proactive in returning assets when they see fraud. We literally created Asset Reality with that vision in mind. We want to build out the infrastructure that the Visa chargeback happens in crypto. But it also, like you say, because there is so much available data, you're right, bulletproof. An agency or a digital company would be able to see illicit assets have been stolen, it's verified, we want to return it, or at least put it in some escrow account and park it as suspicious funds. I think the reason it doesn't happen proactively is because the nature of and Amanda will know it's better than me, but the nature of the legal agreements, just your customer onboarding document when you opened your account. But I know that if we go to the traditional asset sector, if I lease a car, it'll say in my terms and conditions, if you use this in criminal activity, or even if you're arrested for criminal activity, lease is void, they're taking the car back, and they're removing the asset from you. So I think some of the more progressive exchanges are starting to do that now. They're spotting illicit activity because people are using the tools and marking it and saying, we know that that's from a hack. And they're actually making these voluntary disclosures, but you're right, unless they start to almost repaper their customer agreements, I would love to see the exchange taking it forward. And I think my own sort of prediction is that when the likes of the PayPals, the Stripes, when the likes of the traditional, the companies that we know and use every day, I think with crypto, everyone's happy to be a bit more exotic and everything's a bit more sort of creative with the new world. But I think when the established payment processors come into this sort of space, I think they'll be the ones that'll set the benchmark. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope the exchanges get there first. That would be a great position for victims. But I think the payment processors will probably come in and set a benchmark and say, if we see illicit activity, we will have no problem in freezing your account as the suspect. We'll put it to one side, we'll make a disclosure to law enforcement, to the right people, and if you're the victim, we'll get the money right back to you. And it might take years, but hopefully then we get to that Visa chargeback position where you're made whole, and what they do in the background and how they recover that and how they investigate it is sort of, it's their margin, that's their matter. But it's a great question.
That's what I was going to comment on too. I think the gap is also going to be filled by insurance companies returning people's money to them because they've been insured for what's in their crypto accounts. You know, I don't really get victims coming to me complaining that they got their money back from exchanges. So we don't really get involved in too many of those. Certainly, if you're being accused of the wrongdoing and the exchange has frozen your account, that might be something that we would get involved with. But I just wanted to add, I think that you're going to see more and more insurance companies providing that exact service and making sure the victims get their money back before all the litigation happens.
Because for me, it will be the biggest mainstream adoption. If people don't feel safe, the reason we shop online is not because we trust the infrastructure, it's because we know we get our money back if we use Visa. For example, that the reason we use computers is that we know there's antivirus software built in. I think crypto is missing a lot of that mainstream protection. And as the technology evolves and as practical things like you will get your money back within a certain level, if it's quite clear that you haven't just given away your private keys or your seed word on to some beautiful person on some Telegram scam, if you're not like grossly negligent, you should be protected. And maybe the companies just bake that in as part of their margin. Once there's enough data and people can see that it only happens in X amount of cases, I mean, that's what merchant services do. It's a margin. It's a cost of instilling trust in your customers. I think whatever crypto company does that will win the mainstream adoption battle.
And bringing parity to this ecosystem.
Exactly. And keep it the same as TradFi. Yeah.
What else? What other questions can we answer? Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit more about the role of publicity in an investigation that's unfolding, and maybe, you know, you talked a little bit about, you know, the scrutiny that you could be under from people that are mimicking your investigation, but also does it tip off the perpetrator to maybe move things a little bit quicker and to try to make things more complex for you, or, you know, would you guide your clients then to try to keep a lid on things as best possible as things move along? Just if you could speak a little bit more to that, I think it's fascinating.
I'll give over to you. I can just give I agree with what you say. I often find that it's strange that the majority of sort of crypto companies and DeFi protocols live on Twitter, and they make these massive announcements like, "Oh, we've just been hacked." Like, really? Like, would you not be better, like, you know, having like a DEFCON 1, you know, bring people in, try and fix the issue, bring in lawyers, bring in analytic companies, and try and fix the issue before you announce it? And I think that's because of the lack of trust. They think that at least if we're transparent, we'll not get sort of nailed by the regulator or our customer base, because that's the only benchmark and lever they have right now. But certainly in our experience, there's so many cases that never see the light of day. The vast majority of ransomware cases where big companies pay ransom, you'll never see or hear about that. And they're closed. But I'll hand over to yourself in terms of legal
Yeah, I agree with what you were just saying. I think that for us, in our experience, most of our clients absolutely do not want it to be public. So the insurance company example I gave you earlier very much did not want their name to be known, did not want their clients' names to be known, because their belief was, then people know we can be hacked, and then we're going to have 10 more people trying to replicate what happened. So I think that I think you want to trend on the side of not publicizing it. I understand the transparency point for sure, especially when there's a number of victims who are trying to actively figure out what's going on. But I think as the company, you probably want to protect yourself a little bit and not make it so obvious. Yeah.
All right. Last question. What other questions can we answer? In the back.
Do you see any avenues for individuals that might not have the funds to hire lawyers or go to a particular entity for help? Do they go to the regulator and file something anonymously, or any avenues like that?
So from our point of view, that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with the crypto companies themselves. So if we have enough data that Exchange A has 200 customers, and the 201st customer has come to us and said, "I'm yet another person that's lost $10,000," we think that there needs to be this almost self-regulation where those companies should just be making those individuals whole if they were not grossly negligent. Because you're right, otherwise there's no other avenue. But again, this also already exists in the current normal ecosystem and always has done. If someone rips my watch off outside and runs off into the street, the NYPD aren't going to necessarily drop tools and sort of go and investigate that. I have to accept that it's been lost and it's just gone. So I think there'll never be a sort of a magic bullet in crypto, but I do think that the sector itself could do so much more proactively to stop these things happening when they see it, being able to stop it going out the door when it's flagged as a suspicious transaction. For me, the biggest frustration is that someone reports something at 11 a.m. and it's still bleeding out at 11:01, 2, 3, 4, 5. New victims are still coming in behind them. So I think the exchanges could possibly be a bit more proactive in some of those cases in sort of trying to shut things down. But it's also, as Amanda pointed out, the issue is then, what if you shut down someone who's perfectly legitimate and then you're liable because you've sort of stopped their trading activity? And I think that's the legal sort of minefield.
Do you help clients who don't file with regulatory agencies, or?
We will if there's a regulator. So the US is such an amazing place for that reason. You have the whistleblower sort of protections. You have the opportunity to get a payment back on the bounty. But again, where the majority of the scams are, the scammers don't set themselves up in the US or the UK or even the EU. It will be those, and this is the regulatory arbitrage. This is the big risk with crypto. I mean, if I'm a scammer, I am going to set myself up in a country that I know has no law enforcement capability, that has no tools, and has no regulator. So the worst is, it's the stolen Rolex on holiday sort of analogy again, and I think that's the bit that the industry needs to come together, and the public and private sector collaboration to plug those gaps, because it's good for the industry as a whole if we can sort of fix those weaknesses.
The one thing I would just add to that is, if you're an individual of a scheme, it is very unlikely that you're the only victim of that scheme. So as I said earlier, looking to aggregate claims is the best way to make a litigation possible. You can do that by going to a government agency. There's absolutely self-reporting, and we encourage people to do that. But you also can just go to an investigator first, try to figure out if there are other people similarly situated, and then what we're going to see happen is litigation funders start to take these cases forward and actually provide the funding on behalf of groups of individuals.
Well, I want to thank Amanda and Aidan for their comments today, and appreciate you all for your attendance and hope that this was helpful.